Welcome to Murder in a Cab by Merle Chadwick, narrated by Mitchell Larson. Published by BrooksAudiobooks.com. All rights reserved. No portion of this audiobook may be reproduced in any form without written permission of the publisher. Visit BrooksAudiobooks.com for an awesome collection of unique, full-length audiobooks, and be sure to subscribe to be notified when new books are released. Chapter 1. The air was bitterly cold. The sharp December wind swept down the bustling street, biting at the noses and ears of cheerful pedestrians wrapped in their warm coats. Broadway buzzed with the usual holiday shoppers and those seeking amusement. Cabs, pulled by tired horses and driven by weathered cabbies, alongside private carriages with well-groomed steeds managed by liveried coachmen, threaded their way through the crowds, dropping off passengers at the brightly lit theaters and fashionable restaurants. On the corner, an elderly woman hunched against the chill, tucked into herself as she turned the crank of her small barrel organ, producing a faint and mournful tune. Across the way, a newsboy, barely into his teenage years, shivered as he nervously offered his unsold papers to passers-by with trembling lips. Who would dare to open their warm overcoat on such a night, risking a cold just to toss a penny to an old beggar or buy a newspaper from a ragged boy? Even the brightly decorated shop windows failed to capture the attention of the hurried passers-by. It took constant movement to keep the blood flowing and fend off the cold. The imposing officer on the corner, symbolizing the law, directed the flow of vehicles and pedestrians with sweeping gestures of his heavy hands, guiding groups of timid women safely through the endless stream. Meanwhile, the cable cars clattered noisily back and forth, like loud shuttles weaving the vibrant tapestry of city life. Suddenly, from one of the side streets, a cab emerged, making its slow way across Broadway. The large policeman, his gaze fixed on an approaching streetcar, raised a warning hand, but the driver, seemingly oblivious, kept the reins loose as his indifferent horse ambled slowly into the busy avenue. Several people glanced over with mild curiosity at the daring cab driver, who had the audacity to dismiss the authority of men in blue uniforms and brass buttons. Their surprise swiftly turned to shock and horror as their eyes settled on him. His head had drooped onto his chest, and his limp body swayed with every jolt of the cab. It seemed he was unaware of everything around him, as though he were drunk or in a stupor. Beside him sat a young man, bundled up tight in his overcoat, a sealskin cap pulled down low over his ears. He looked terribly pale. Those who caught a glimpse of his face could see his lips were drawn tight, and his eyes sparkled with feverish intensity. One hand clutched the lapel of his coat, and with the other he shook the unconscious cab driver, desperately trying to rouse him from his stupor before it was too late. The gripman on the streetcar suddenly realized the danger. He immediately slammed his weight down on the brake, ringing the gong loudly. The policeman also grasped the situation in an instant and rushed to grab the horse's reins. But it was too late. The cab was already across the tracks when the streetcar, moving at a slower speed, collided with it. Just before the impact, the young man in the sealskin cap leaped from the box onto the street. He landed on his feet, but lost his balance and stumbled forward, hitting the ground on his left arm, still trapped in the lapel of his coat. He must have hurt himself. Those nearby heard him let out a groan. But the attention quickly shifted elsewhere, and no one noticed the young man as he got to his feet and disappeared into the crowd. The cab, teetering for a moment on two wheels, toppled onto its side with a loud crash of splintering wood and shattering glass. The driver tumbled off the box in a heap. In that moment, the terrified passengers in the cab scrambled for the doors, pushing and shoving in a frantic rush toward safety. After the initial chaos, it was clear that, while shaken, no one was seriously hurt, other than a few bruises from the struggle to escape. A crowd had gathered around the overturned cab, and more policemen had arrived to assist the first officer, who was now seated calmly on the horse's back. This seemed unnecessary, as the poor animal, though uninjured, looked content to stay where it was, unwilling to return to the grind of its daily routine. The cab driver had been jolted by the fall and lay still for several seconds, appearing unconscious. Eventually, with help, he regained his feet, still dazed and trying to make sense of what had just happened. "Are you hurt?" one of the officers asked. The driver muttered a response that was hard to understand, then raised a hand to a scalp wound from which blood dripped steadily. At that moment, two men pushed through the crowd, which the surrounding policemen struggled to keep at bay. One was a middle-aged man who introduced himself as Dr. Fletcher and offered his medical assistance. The other was a younger man with sharp grey eyes who remained quiet, revealing only a reporter's badge. The doctor immediately focused on the cab driver, checking his pulse, tapping on his arms, and smelling his breath before pronouncing his diagnosis. "No broken bones. That small scalp wound is nothing to worry about. This man has been drinking heavily. He's just drunk." By now the horse had been unharnessed and the cab set back on its wheels. The reporter stood by, quietly observing the scene. Dr. Fletcher turned to him. "Come along, Quentin. Neither of us is needed here, and if we don't hurry, Reynard's dinner will have to wait for us. It's 7:45 already." The reporter looked as if he might follow his friend, but hesitated for a moment, uncertain. "Doctor," he finally asked, "are you sure the man is drunk?" "He has definitely been drinking heavily. Why do you ask?" "Because it seems to me— Wait, we can't leave yet. The passenger is injured more seriously than the driver." "The passenger," the physician responded, turning in surprise to the policeman. "What passenger?" the officer asked, glancing at the cab driver. "Do you have a passenger inside, young man?" "No," the cabman replied, sounding somewhat more alert after the shock and loss of blood. "No, I don't have any fare, except for the man on the box." The reporter observed the scene closely as he spoke, then pointed towards the step of the cab, clearly illuminated by a nearby streetlight. "I mean the passenger whose blood is spilling there," he said quietly. Everyone turned to follow his gesture. A few drops of a thick, dark liquid had seeped from beneath the door and were dripping onto the metal step. The cab door was closed, and the curtain was drawn down over the window, the glass shattered by the impact. One of the policemen attempted to open the door, but it stuck in the frame. He then used all his strength to force it, and suddenly it swung open. As it did, the body of a man lurched from inside the cab, and before anyone could catch it, tumbled onto the pavement in a heap. A low cry of horror emerged from the crowd. The cabman's passenger was a man past middle age, dressed neatly but plainly. As Dr. Fletcher and a policeman leaned over the lifeless body, the reporter cast a sharp glance at the cab driver, whose wide eyes showed a mix of horror and disbelief. Suddenly, the doctor sprang to his feet, a look of shock on his face. "Is he dead, doctor?" the policeman asked. "He's been dead for a while," the physician replied gravely. "The body is nearly cold." "Been dead for a while," the policeman echoed, surprised. "Yes, this man was shot. Look here," pointing to a dark red streak that began at the left side of the deceased's coat and trailed down to form a small pool of blood on the cab floor. He continued. "Shot," the policeman exclaimed, quickly turning to one of his fellow officers. "Keep an eye on the cab driver, Jim. We need to bring him in. And watch out for the other man. Hurry." Directing his attention back to the cab driver, both of whose shoulders were firmly held by the policeman, he demanded harshly, "Who is this man?" The cab driver was now completely sober. He stood there, pale and shaking between his two captors, and replied earnestly, "I swear to God, I don't know, sir. I've never seen him before." The policeman stared at him in disbelief for a moment before dismissively turning away. "Fine, kid," he said. "You don't need to confess to me, but I have a feeling you'll get to share that little tale with a judge and jury." He then began to search the dead man's pockets, finding them empty. "Looks like robbery," he muttered. "What's going on, Jim? Haven't found the other guy yet." Jim shook his head. The young man in the sealskin cap had vanished without a trace. The reporter was bent over the body as Dr. Fletcher sliced through the clothing, revealing a small, round wound. There's another bullet wound, Quentin remarked, tilting the body slightly to point out a second round hole in the back of the dead man. He seemed fascinated by this discovery. He quickly pulled out a steel tape measure and with careful precision took several measurements, likely to pinpoint the positions of the two wounds. After that, he stepped into the cab and, striking match after match, spent several minutes in a frantic search for something he couldn't seem to find. "That's odd," he muttered to himself as he finally emerged. "What is it?" Fletcher asked, having caught the words, but the reporter either didn't hear or chose not to reply. He resumed his search on the brightly lit pavement near the cab, examining every stone, investigating every crack and rut, prodding with his cane at every lump of frozen mud, and turning over every stray piece of paper. "Well, Doctor," he said when he finally rejoined his companion, "if you've done everything you can, we may as well leave. It's one of the most intriguing puzzles I've encountered, but there's nothing more for me to learn here right now. By the way, as I mentioned earlier, are you certain the cab driver is drunk? I wish you would take a closer look at him. This might be more significant than it initially appeared." A few minutes later, the physician and the reporter hurried onward to make up for lost time. The cab and its driver had been taken by the police, and the driver's grim passenger was jolting along 26th Street, heading toward a small building near the East River, where the lost souls of the city could find final rest, laid upon a cold stone slab as they drifted into eternal sleep. Broadway had taken on its festive charm once again. The old woman at the corner still ground out her mournful tunes, while the teary-eyed newsboy, with his dwindling stack of newspapers, continued to shiver in the brisk wind as he offered his wares to the hurried passers-by. The hefty policeman guided his group safely through the throng of moving vehicles, and the clanging cable cars resumed their rumbling journey, as if the unraveling of a thread in the fabric of the city's life was a regular occurrence, hardly worth noting. A few tiny dark red stains on the pavement were all that remained to tell the tale of the drama that had recently unfolded in the bustling street. Soon enough, even those were wiped away by the casual strike of a horse's hoof. The disturbance had vanished from the surface. The flow of life resumed its steady course through the veins of the metropolis. Chapter 2. "What I mean to say," Ralph Quentin declared with quiet confidence, "is that every crime is its own historian. Every little detail is captured in circumstantial evidence just as completely as if an eyewitness had seen it happen. Indeed, more thoroughly and accurately than the perpetrator could describe it." The reporter was in his 30s, with well-defined features that unmistakably conveyed intelligence and refinement. When he was still, his face often wore a habitual look of deep contemplation, which could easily lead someone inattentive to mistake Ralph Quentin for an aimless dreamer. However, a brief glimpse into his sharp grey eyes was usually enough to dispel any such notions, revealing a keen perception and a depth of character. His mouth was firm yet gentle, and his demeanour was that of a well-bred gentleman with an education. "But," the host countered, "you can't seriously believe in the infallibility of circumstantial evidence." "Why not?" "Because you must know just as well as anyone how misleading uncorroborated circumstantial evidence can be. I'm well aware of the remarkable results you've often achieved for the Daily Tempest in unearthing clues that the official detectives completely missed. But honestly, weren't your conclusions often the product of fortunate guesses, which would have remained fairly useless as evidence if they hadn't been confirmed later by direct testimony?" "Let me respond to your question with another one, Reynard," Quentin replied. "When you write a check, does the teller at the bank need witnesses to confirm your signature before they accept it as valid?" "No, certainly not." "Exactly. They probably know Harvey M. Reynard's signature better than they do the face of Reynard the artist. And yet, the evidence in this case is purely circumstantial. I know of at least one recent case where the officials of a New York bank placed their complete trust in circumstantial evidence, even though the depositor had clearly stated that the check, which bore a forgery of his signature, was genuine." "I assume you're talking about the Forsyth case," Reynard remarked. "But you have to remember that Colonel Forsyth was trying to protect the forger, who just happens to be his wayward son. Exactly, Quentin replied. Another witness could easily be influenced by his own interests or biases, whether it's jealousy, love, or hatred, or he might be clouded by eagerness, ignorance, or forgetfulness. In contrast, circumstantial evidence is always neutral, honest, and definitive. When a geologist interprets the Earth's history from its crust, when a Kepler or a Newton defines the constant laws of the universe based on the movements of celestial bodies, they base their conclusions on purely circumstantial evidence. True, but don't forget that science has frequently drawn incorrect conclusions, Renard interjected. As a result, it's constantly necessary to revise theories to align with newly discovered or better understood information. I agree with that, Quentin responded, but the error lies with those interpreting the evidence, not with the evidence itself. A consistent cause will always lead to the same effect. The same sequence of events will inevitably cause one specific outcome. Any apparent exceptions to this rule stem from unseen differences in the causing factors or from missing or additional pieces of evidence. Therefore, I maintain that a criminal, no matter how clever, leaves behind a complete record of every action he takes, from which a skilled detective can reconstruct his crime with total certainty. In other words, murder will out, chimed in a man who had been quietly observing the conversation until now. He spoke with a faint smile that barely concealed a hint of disdain. Quentin locked eyes with his companion and spoke solemnly. I would hesitate to make such a sweeping statement, Dr. Trumbo. All I've said is that the history of every crime is etched in tangible evidence. The truth is evident, but a blind man cannot see it, just as an illiterate person cannot grasp its meaning. Every occurrence, no matter how trivial, results from a natural cause and leaves its undeniable mark on the world. The Indian tracking his enemy can read the story of their passage, recorded in the disturbed earth and snapped branches. Meanwhile, the bloodhound follows a far more elusive, yet equally certain scent trail. The quarry leaves behind an invisible and immeasurable trace of itself with each step. Perhaps I can clarify with an example. When a photographer takes an exposed plate from their camera in a dark room, it seems blank at first. However, it actually holds the intricate history of an event, which, in skilled hands, can be revealed as undeniable evidence to even the least perceptive observer. Here, the light's actinic rays create this evidence, yet every natural force, in one way or another, helps the detective corner the criminal. Unless, Trumbo interjected, the advantage lies with the quarry. In that case, the forces of nature turn against the hunter. Ah, the reporter replied sharply, the odds are not balanced. The dice are loaded. The detective has a lifetime to rectify any mistake, but any misstep by the criminal is often fatal. And who can claim infallibility? Certainly not the detective, Trumbo replied with a smooth irony. I've always thought the reverence he receives, largely due to the lively imaginations of sensational fiction writers, is completely unwarranted. Firstly, most of the crimes we hear about are committed either by individuals of low intelligence or by those driven by madness. I include in this latter group any criminal who acts out of intense emotions such as hatred, love, jealousy, or anger. Meanwhile, the detective is eager to broadcast his successes to the world, but just as careful to bury any accounts of his failures whenever possible. You can point to numerous cases where, even years later, a crime is solved, and the criminal is forced to face their guilt. But, in my view, interrupted a high-pitched voice from an elderly man dressed in clerical attire, conscience is ultimately the best detective. Conscience, Trumbo replied with calm sarcasm. That term is just a polite way of referring to one's fear of getting caught and punished. A true criminal, confident in their ability to evade detection, knows nothing of conscience. But where can we find a person with such extraordinary self-confidence? Renard asked. Perhaps they are numerous, Trumbo replied swiftly. They are the authors of every crime whose story remains untold. Are there really that many? Let's examine just one category of crime, shall we? Take murder, for instance. Whenever detectives or their allies, like our friend Mr. Quentin from the press, manage to solve a sensational murder mystery, we, the unsuspecting public, eagerly applaud their work and promptly place them on a pedestal in the Hall of Fame. That's all well and good. But what about the dark mysteries that remain forever unsolved? What about all the countless crimes that go unnoticed? Come now, Doctor, Renard chuckled. Isn't it a bit contradictory to base your argument on crimes whose existence you openly admit you're unaware of? Trumbo smiled grimly and replied, visit the morgue of any large city, where the unclaimed dead are laid out for identification. Aside from the morbid curiosity that brings onlookers to such a place, you will see each body being carefully examined by numerous individuals, each hoping to find a missing friend or family member. Yet, at most, each corpse reveals the answer to only one mystery. So what about the dozens, even hundreds of others? After a brief pause, he continued, no, murder does not always come to light, not when the perpetrator is what I'd call a professional, a genius in his craft, educated, intelligent, and dispassionate, almost scientific. Fortunately for the reputation of both amateur and professional detectives, true criminals of such genius tend to be quite modest and withdrawn. They can't draw public attention to their cleverness. They can't boast about their exploits in the daily news. Not only are their masterpieces left unsigned, but they also remain forever unknown. A detective builds his reputation on his successes, while the criminal's infamy is grounded in his failures. Dr. Trumbo delivered this final point with the calm precision that was his trademark. The biting irony of his words was underscored by his tranquil demeanor. I must say, Doctor, Renard laughed, you've missed your calling. You really should have become a scientific criminal yourself. You have the theory down pat, and with a bit of practice, you'd surely excel in the field. A hint of amusement flickered across Trumbo's face. Perhaps you're right, Mr. Renard. In any case, I believe I can confidently say that had I pursued the path you suggest, I could have prepared for your friend Mr. Quentin had some interesting little puzzles to test his wits. I feel like I could have been both an artist and a scientist in that realm. You might console yourself by writing an intriguing and valuable book, something like Advice for Young Criminals, or Crime as an Art Form. Regardless, your brilliant criminals certainly have a staunch supporter in you. But what on earth have the detectives done to you to provoke this strong criticism? Nothing, but as an impartial observer, I appreciate a fair fight. If I'm wrong about modern detectives, I'm open to being convinced. I have $5,000 to bet against 100 that I can grab any daily newspaper and find an unsolved mystery that no detective on this planet could unravel. Anyone willing to take me up on that, gentlemen? As he spoke, his eyes connected with Quentin's, suddenly sparkling with a fierce defiance that quickly shifted back to the calm, cynical smile of a worldly man. Consider it done, said Quentin in a steady voice. All right, Mr. Quentin, said Dr. Trumbo, seemingly indifferent. I'll stick to the columns of your own newspaper for the puzzle you'll be working on. And, he added with a smirk, you can determine the time limit for this wager. Hear, hear, cheered a young broker. This is getting interesting and promises some entertainment for those of us bold enough to bet on this unusual challenge. I, for one, am ready to place reasonable odds on the side of law and order, represented by our savvy friend Quentin. Come on, Chadwick, would you be tempted to back that seemingly overlooked figure, the scientific criminal, at 2-1? Sure, Fred, replied Chadwick. I'll take you for 100. A few more playful bets were established, and a copy of the Evening Tempest was promptly requested. Chapter 3. Reynard's stag dinner was winding down when a servant entered, bringing a copy of the Evening Tempest. The dessert plates had been cleared away, coffee and liqueurs were served, and the guests had lit their cigars. The host handed the newspaper to Dr. Trumbo, who began to browse through its pages leisurely. Ah, this should be interesting, he said after a moment. Here's something that might serve our needs. Mysterious GUNSHOTS in Wall Street. Who fired them? Strange story of a discarded satchel. Police BAFFLED. While on his beat at 5:15 this afternoon, policeman John Flynn heard the sound of a gunshot from the direction of the Knickerbocker Bank. "The Knickerbocker Bank," interjected the young broker. "Mr. Sullivan, that might pique your interest. Do your directors practice their marksmanship during board meetings?" "What's this about the Knickerbocker Bank?" the man addressed asked, having been caught up in a serious discussion about financial matters with his neighbor and not paying attention to the wider conversation. Trumbo adjusted his eyeglasses and continued in a steady voice. Policeman John Flynn, hearing the report of a gunshot from the direction of the Knickerbocker Bank on Wall Street, sprinted toward the building. As he got within about 20 yards, another shot rang out, and at that moment a man burst down the steps and raced toward Broadway. Richard Sullivan, president of the Knickerbocker Bank, now listened with rapt attention. Beneath his composed exterior, the anxiety of a bank president was evident. The stability of a bank, much like a woman's honor, can be at the mercy of fleeting rumors. The man was carrying a small satchel, which he dropped as soon as he realized he was being chased. After an intense pursuit, Flynn caught up with him, recognizing him as Michael Quinlan, also known as Shorty Duff, a notorious pickpocket. On the way back to the bank, the policeman questioned his captive about the gunshots. Quinlan vehemently denied having fired the shots, but confessed to stealing the satchel. He recounted that, as he walked by the bank, he noticed the outer door was slightly open. Spotting the satchel in the vestibule, he cautiously entered, crouching low to keep himself hidden from view through the inner door, which had a plate glass top. Just as he reached for the satchel, he was startled by the sound of a gunshot. Momentarily stunned and unsure of what to do, he decided to slip away when another shot rang out. Gripped by panic, he ran but was quickly caught by Flynn. When Flynn arrived at the bank, he found the outer door closed but unlocked. However, the heavy iron gate separating it from the inner door was securely locked, preventing entry. The Knickerbocker Bank also had a second entrance on Exchange Place, but this, too, was protected by a solid iron gate, which was found locked. Flynn called for assistance, and policemen Kirkpatrick and O'Donnell answered the call. He assigned Kirkpatrick to monitor the Exchange Place entrance, and O'Donnell to watch the Wall Street entry, while he took Quinlan to the police station. Messengers were immediately sent to the home of Mr. Richard Sullivan, the bank president, and to Mr. George S. Rutherford, the cashier. Sullivan was not at home, and since his family was out of town, there was no one who could inform them of his whereabouts for the evening. Every gaze in the room turned toward Richard Sullivan, as this portion of the account was read. His expression remained calm, a testament to the veteran financier's control. Yet for someone as perceptive as Quentin, the man's true anxiety was revealed in the way his right hand fidgeted with a fork on the table. "Yes," the banker replied nonchalantly, aware of the curious stares from the other guests and silently answering their unasked questions. "It's true. I didn't inform my housekeeper that I was invited to dine with our friend Renaud this evening. There was really no reason to." "Well, Dr. Trumbo, did they find Rutherford?" Trumbo had glanced up as the banker spoke. He then casually found his place and resumed reading an article in the Tempest. The cashier fortunately was home and rushed downtown immediately with the bank's set of keys. 2 detectives from the central office accompanied him, and the 3 men carefully searched the premises. They found nothing unusual, except that 3 gas jets were lit and turned up to full brightness. Initially, the detectives thought bank robbers might have entered the building, and one of them had fired upon Shorty Duff as he attempted to steal the satchel from the vestibule. This could explain the gunshots heard by Flynn. However, a thorough examination of the bank revealed no evidence of any bullets. The valise, when opened, contained only a change of linen for a man and a few personal items of little value. The bag itself was a basic, cheap leather handbag, designed to imitate alligator skin. The police are currently searching for its owner in hopes he can provide some insight into the mystery surrounding the gunshots. When Dr. Trumbo finished reading, everyone except Sullivan and Quentin wore disappointed expressions. Sullivan settled back in his chair, his face relaxing, and the anxious bank president transformed once more into the charming and sophisticated man of society. The reporter sat, thoughtfully staring into his wineglass. "Well, Mr. Quentin," Trumbo said, "what's your take on my little problem?" "I'm already working on this case for the Tempest," the reporter replied quietly. "Really? Perhaps you're the author of this very article." "No. Then would you like to make the resolution of this little mystery the wager for your theories?" "Wait a minute, Doctor," Renard interjected. "You're being unfair to Quentin. Why choose a problem that, for all intents and purposes, the police have already solved to test his abilities? Give him a real challenge, and then you might give your wager some genuine interest." "Oh, you think the problem is already resolved?" "Absolutely. The article you just read seemed like it might be intriguing, but ended up being an anticlimax. What's the crime here? A petty sneak thief admitted to stealing a satchel worth maybe $8 or $10 with its contents. And where's the mystery? Just a few pieces of unmarked linen of such little value that the owner doesn't even feel it's worth claiming. I have to disagree with you, Mr. Renard. Although the crime may indeed be a petty theft, it has intriguing aspects that you seem to overlook in your dismissive summary. To me, the case revolves around figuring out the reason for two rather mysterious pistol shots, not to mention the minor detail of lit gas jets behind securely locked gates. As Mr. Quentin has pointed out, every effect has a cause. I would like to know what caused the gas to light in the Knickerbocker Bank." "I'll probably find that out the day after tomorrow," Mr. Quentin said. Sullivan smiled. "I'll have a word with the fellow about his carelessness in forgetting to turn off the gas when he locked up." "Mr. Sullivan's idea," Trumbo continued, "makes sense on its own. We might even assume that the same careless employee, after securing the bank, neglected to close the outer door on the Wall Street side. But even then, we still haven't addressed who owns the satchel or the two gunshots. The police theory that those shots were fired by bank robbers seems, I must admit, quite far-fetched. Professional thieves wouldn't likely shoot unless they were cornered, and then they would aim to kill or at least disable. If their shots missed, they would leave some evidence behind." "I would suggest," Sullivan interjected, "that the shots heard by the policeman and his prisoner didn't come from inside the bank." "That seems quite plausible," Trumbo conceded. "However, they must have been fired nearby since the witnesses all agreed they sounded like they came from inside. So where did they actually come from? Who fired them? And why? Overall, I don't think my little puzzle is so poorly constructed. What do you think, Mr. Quentin?" "I agree with you that the issue is likely more complex than Renard initially thought." "Very well. Then I assume you are willing to take on the task of providing whatever information is needed to complete the evidence against Quinlan." "Not at all," Quentin replied firmly. "Really? Well, if Mr. Quentin wishes to back out of his bet." "I'm not backing out of my bet," Quentin stated. "I agree to solve your puzzle within 30 days or forfeit my stakes, but I cannot be tasked with proving the truth or untruth of any preconceived theory. I don't have any personal knowledge of the situation yet, so I have no theory." "Of course," Trumbo remarked with a hint of irony. "I had forgotten your scientific approach." "Well, it's possible the policeman took Shorty Duff's satchel," one of the men remarked. "Maybe," Quentin replied, maintaining his calm demeanor as Trumbo smirked. "Gentlemen," Trumbo declared, "I'll agree to Mr. Quentin's terms. If you're on board," he added, directing his gaze at the reporter, "our host can hold the stakes and determine the bet." "I, for one, am with Renard," Dr. Fletcher said. "I'm a bit let down by the case. I've seen Quentin untangle some truly baffling situations. There are plenty of intriguing mysteries to be found. Just this evening, on our way here, we stumbled upon a rather strange case, didn't we? Please pass the cognac, Reynard. I wish I had something like this in my cellar. It would be worth its weight in gold." Dr. Fletcher caught Quentin's steady gaze and sensed that, for whatever reason, the reporter preferred he not share their earlier adventure. Only one person seemed to pick up on the sudden end to his story, Trumbo, who had been watching him with mild curiosity, and had intercepted the reporter's cautionary glance at his friend. Trumbo studied Dr. Fletcher closely for a full minute, seemingly entertained by his awkward attempt to change the subject, before quietly sipping his coffee. Chapter 4. Reynard's dinner party had come to an end, and among the first to leave, shortly after midnight, were Sullivan, Quentin, and Dr. Fletcher. The reporter seldom indulged in such social gatherings. He was a man of action, hard-working and deeply curious. Most of his time outside of work was dedicated to studying a variety of fields in both art and science. Quentin believed that a broad knowledge was crucial for success in his career. Rarely did he permit himself to spend a valuable evening socializing unless it served a greater purpose. However, he made an exception for Reynard's dinner, and his encounter with Sullivan, whom he hadn't met before, was purely coincidental. Still, Sullivan was someone Quentin needed to speak with for his investigation into the Knickerbocker Bank mystery, and he seized the unexpected opportunity. After being introduced to the bank president, Quentin had looked for a moment to chat privately. When this didn't arise during the evening, he timed his departure to coincide with Sullivan's. "Are you heading down to the bank tonight, Mr. Sullivan?" Quentin asked, as the three faced the sharp wind. "Me, no, why would I?" the banker replied, sounding genuinely surprised. "I can't think of a good reason for you to," said the reporter. "If today were a banking day, we'd be pressed for time. But since it's New Year's Day, there's little chance anything will be disturbed. It will be much easier to follow the trail in daylight than by gaslight. Our friends at the central office usually do a fine job of uncovering at least the more obvious clues in a case like this, even if they struggle to interpret them correctly. Since they've come up empty in their search tonight, I anticipate we're facing a particularly challenging puzzle." "Mr. Quentin," Sullivan said, sounding a bit anxious, "it seems as if you really believe some kind of mysterious crime has taken place at the bank." "I don't yet know enough about the situation to make any definitive claims," Quentin replied. "However, if we take the details from the article that Dr. Trumbo read to us this evening as true, they certainly paint a strange picture." Sullivan paused for a moment to think. "Still, the fact that our cashier found everything in proper order at the bank is quite reassuring," he said thoughtfully. "True," Quentin agreed. "From a banker's perspective, it might seem that the situation is entirely uninteresting. However, from a detective's view, it holds plenty of intriguing possibilities. So, whether or not you plan to investigate further yourself, I urge you to let me at least conduct a thorough search of the area in the morning light." Sullivan didn't look particularly pleased as Quentin spoke. He took a moment before responding. "To be frank, Mr. Quentin," he finally said with deliberate politeness, "I won't deny that your request puts me in an uncomfortable position. You're a friend of my good friend Reynard, and I've enjoyed our conversation this evening enough that I hope to see you among my acquaintances in the future. So, personally, I would be happy to grant your request. On the other hand, you're a journalist, and I'm a banker. As the saying goes, happy is the nation that has no history. Capital is notoriously cautious, you know." "I understand," replied Quentin. "You're worried that solving the mystery of the gunshots might tarnish the reputation of the Knickerbocker Bank." "No, not at all. You're misunderstanding me," the banker said, his voice slightly heated. "It's not so much about the bank's reputation, since there's been no robbery or embezzlement. Rather, depositors don't like seeing their bank's name in the papers. It sends them into a panic. Depositors are terribly irrational, Mr. Quentin. They can become frantic over the slightest issue and behave like wild sheep. The Knickerbocker Bank doesn't fear any run that might happen. Our credibility is built on solid ground. But even so, a bank run is costly, Mr. Quentin, very costly." "Given that the bank's situation is quite stable," the reporter commented, "it seems to me that the damage from any publicity has already been done. Your depositors' imaginations are now undermining the Knickerbocker Bank from within. If the truth doesn't harm its credibility, it can only bolster it. Withholding the truth in this case only breeds suspicion." Sullivan frowned at the shift in the conversation. He walked in silence for a few moments, looking uncertain. Finally, he seemed to come to a decision. Perhaps you're right, Mr. Quentin. Regardless, we have nothing to hide from the public. If you come by the bank tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I'd be happy to meet you there. Quentin nodded, in agreement. Well, gentlemen, this is my street, the banker said. Good evening, good evening. And with that, he departed. Where are you headed now, Fletcher? The reporter asked, as the two friends resumed their stroll. Home to bed like a sensible man, the physician replied. Don't do that. Come along with me to my place instead. I need to organize the information I've gathered so far in the two intriguing cases I've taken on today. In the cab mystery, at least, I believe you can be of help. Sure thing, my friend. Lead the way. I'm eager to hear what theories you've formed about these two cases. Theories, Quentin replied. I don't deal in theories. I focus on uncovering facts and arranging them in a coherent order as much as I can. Once I've done that, the story of the crime is practically told. Crime solving is a precise science. Like all sciences, imagination plays a crucial role here, but it's limited to organizing and interpreting the facts. The unshakable foundation of facts must always come first.